content provided by our host and guests are just that, opinions and views that are not intended to malign any group, religion, business, individual, or thing. That said, please know that many of the stories shared and topics we discuss on this podcast contain disturbing or emotional content, which may be triggering. As I mentioned on my social media accounts, I basically come with a triggering content warning, but with lots of love and compassion. This podcast is conducted in a long-form interview style with the hope of capturing some of the deeper considerations and details around survivors' stories. We also hope to help those on the outside who are caring about survivors in a group of high demand, high control, by sharing their perspective and struggles, and also expert voices intended to help us unpack some of the complicated considerations around topics related to cults. Welcome to Season 2 of the Project Hope podcast. I am your host, Jennifer. As many of you know, I am a cult survivor myself. I got out of this group in 2012, and for anyone interested, you can hear the story of how I got in and how I got out in Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. I now work with survivors of coercive control. I am not a psychotherapist. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control and have been trained specifically in areas of expertise that will support survivors of coercive control. You're welcome to check out my credentials and offerings at jennifer-french.com. And I'm going to take a moment here to define this term coercive control, as one of my heart's desires is to help society at large better understand coercive control in cases that are not just culty, but across the globe. I view coercive control as a societal issue, a human rights issue. It's at the heart of cases where women and girls are murdered. We find coercive control in one-to-one relationships that are intimate, in gangs, sex trafficking, and cults of all types. Coercive control is a strategic pattern of behavior designed to exploit, control, create dependency, and dominate. The victim's everyday existence is micromanaged, and their space for action, as well as potential as a human being, is limited and controlled by the abuser. Initially, the victim may be drawn into the relationship with love bombing and charm. Gaslighting, isolation, economic control, and financial abuse can take place alongside rules and regulations that are gradually introduced over time and change at the whim of the abuser. The victim knows there are consequences if rules are broken, and they apply to the victim rather than the perpetrator, creating a double standard. Over time, coercively controlling behavior erodes the victim's sense of self, their confidence, self-esteem, agency, and autonomy. The abuser creates an unreal world of contradiction, confusion, and fear. It is helpful to know that 51% of victims do not even know that they are being abused, manipulated, and controlled. Coercive control correlates significantly to serious harm, and in cases of intimate partner violence, it precedes homicide. These can be difficult topics to grapple with, so I truly hope that this podcast helps to protect you and those you love with helpful voices and information. If you appreciate the podcast, please let us know, subscribe and comment with kindness, think critically, trust your gut, and be free. It is such a pleasure to introduce you all to a wonderful human who has become both a colleague and friend since the time of our interview. Jean Brown is a writer, podcaster, and mom to 2 young children. She has a bachelor's degree in political science and writing from Loyola University, Maryland, and a master's in public policy and public administration from Concordia University in Montreal. She is active in creating content for Seek Safely's website, social media, brand outreach, and legislative efforts. Jean lived in Thailand and has traveled extensively, including treasured memories of traveling with her sister Kirby. She now lives in Toronto, Canada, with her family. She loves dogs, karaoke, cooking, and ordering in when she doesn't feel like cooking. My introduction to Jean's journey, as you will soon find out, is a thread that links back to sometime around 2009 or 2010, when I became aware of the event that took place in Sedona, Arizona, under the guidance of James Arthur Ray, whereby he conducted a, quote, sweat lodge that ended up in the death of Jean's sister, Kirby Brown, amidst two others, Liz Newman and James Shore. At the time that this case broke, I myself was in a cult. Years later, I would watch a documentary about the story, and when I dove into the book that Jean and her mother Ginny wrote, I would understand on a much deeper level what led up to the event that would change lives forever. This incredible memoir, called This Sweet Life, How We Lived After Kirby Died, by Ginny Brown and Jean Brown, is a heartbreaking and harrowing journey from the perspective of family as they receive the news of Kirby's death and try to sort through the aftermath, the trial, and life as a family that was once 6, now 5. This book is so beautifully written and weaves the perspectives of Ginny and Jean together in a tapestry that seems to capture the stunning sparkle of Kirby. Her spirit as a seeker, her sincere care for others, and the truly tragic impact that this event had on their family, all who knew Kirby, as well as some of the impact on others. This is essentially the story that brings us to part of the legacy that is Kirby. And this is the organization currently run by the Brown family called Seek Safely. I will say more about Seek in the intro for part 2, but for now, please feel free to check out the Seek Safely website and podcast with links in the show notes to all the things. I welcome you to part 1 of my 2-part interview with Jean Brown. So welcome, Jean Brown, to the Project Hope podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. So I thought we'd just begin. I'd love for you to just share a little bit about kind of who you are and also a little bit maybe about the context of your family so we get a little bit of a picture of that.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Jean Brown, and I live in Hamilton, Ontario, although I grew up in New York State. And I'm one of 4 kids. I'm the youngest in my family. And my oldest sister is 12 years older than me, so a big spread. And I grew up in kind of a small town in about an hour and a half northwest of the city, and had, a pretty nice childhood, and we were always a pretty strong family. We did a lot of camping trips together and, tried to be adventurous. And, to the point where I ended up meeting my husband while traveling in Thailand, and he's Canadian, so that's why I live in Canada now. And I have 2 young kids, so at the moment I'm kind of immersed in, family life with them, but I'm also a writer, and I work for my family's nonprofit organization, which I know we'll get into more as well. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks, Jean.
No problem.
And I thought that we could begin, if you're open to this, that maybe you just introduce the audience to the bright spirit that Kirby is, and just giving us a little description of her as a person.
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, Kirby is the oldest in the family and 12 years older than me. So she was like very much my big sister, kind of like a bit on a pedestal for me always in my life. When she was starting university, I was just starting kindergarten. So I had very much that like big sister, little sister relationship with her for most of our time together. But she was very much like, she was just a very vibrant person. She was very adventurous. She had lived in many different places and had many different jobs. Like she could kind of make a life for herself wherever she went. And she always, wanted to have interesting experiences. And she, at the time of her death, she was living in Baja, Mexico, with kind of a really interesting expat community there. And luckily, I had some great experiences with her before she died, where we were a bit more like peers, She came and visited me when I lived in Thailand, twice actually. She was, of all the people in my family and in my life who would come visit me, it was definitely Kirby. And, she was the person in our family who, like, even though she lived far away, she would always come home to surprise my parents for the holidays, for example. And she was a real doer in my family. She would organize us and kind of push us to do fun things together. And, she just had that real kind of vibrant personality. And, for all the people in her life, she was helping people, with whatever they needed help with. She, had a couple stories where she had actually saved people's lives.
Yeah.
Just because she was like the person who took action. So something happened, she was the one who was going to jump into action to like get whatever needed to get done. And that's how she was for so many people, her close friends and for our family. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think of one of the things that's such an image for me from, that's in the book is that feels so representative of her is how you all have painted this picture of what she was like in the midst of musical scenes.
Yeah.
The one with the tip jar prancing around and getting tips for the band. And so every musician knew her in the area because they'd make more money when Kirby was there.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's totally it. She loved music. I think she did play in band when in high school, but she wasn't herself like a huge musician, but she loved live music. So she was always going to, see jazz and blues bands. And yeah, if she was the party person. So she would go around, get everybody up dancing. She was the one who would turn like a fun night into an amazing night. And she'd get people dancing so that they were having the best possible time. And then she would go around with the tip jar to support the band. So yeah, no, that's totally a good story that definitely represents her spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the intro, of course, I'll mention the book, but just for the audience that we'll probably be referring a little to the book, or I may, because
Sure.
For me, it was a really powerful and kind of intimate experience of entering into your family and the experience that you all had around Kirby's death and the, ongoing events from that. So that would be a nice transition, Jean, into, and again, as much or as little as you feel like sharing around kind of what happened for Kirby.
Sure. Yeah. So, in October 2009, Kirby went to something called the Spiritual Warrior Retreat, which was one of the kind of highlight experiences with the self-help guru, James Ray. Ray had been a part of the book, The Secret, the book and then movie that came out, which was very successful. So after that, he was on Oprah a couple of times. He was on the Today Show and Larry King. Like, he was kind of a rising star in the self-help industry. And yeah, she went to this event. It was a 5-day retreat in Sedona, Arizona. And there were a number of events, which we'll get into throughout the course of the week. But the culminating event was a so-called sweat lodge. And I'm always careful to say, you know, put sweat lodge in air quotes, because a sweat lodge is a legitimate Native American tradition, but Ray really appropriated the tradition. And as a result, what he did was not really not a proper sweat lodge. And 3 people ended up dying of heat stroke, essentially, including my sister. So yeah, that was obviously quite shocking for my family. And then as a result of that incident, you know, we learned a lot more about the self-help industry. There was a criminal trial, investigation, and trial. So it really, like, the death of a loved one always blows up your life, but it was quite a spectacular blow up for our family. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe, Jean, actually, before we go into some of the incidents of the event, actually, I'm feeling like it would be nice to hear a little bit around, you know, some of that impact, if you're open to kind of sharing that, sort of what that, or a little bit around what that kind of journey was like for you. Just kind of from the moment of discovery, and then we kind of journey through, you know, the trial really and beyond.
Right.
But as I've shared with you, you know, one of the things that I found extraordinarily powerful about the book, and for the audience, I have asked Jean that with her and Jenny, her mother's permission, because they both wrote the book together, that there are 2 really substantial segments about, actually, you label it grief, don't you?
Yeah.
And that I would really like to have each of those voices as resources, really, for people, because it is, each of you have these different perspectives, which certainly weave in and out of similar, you know, feelings and questions and patterns.
Right.
But grief is just such a kind of a mysterious and personal journey.
Yeah.
And in both of your sharing, I just connected to so much of it. And I felt so strongly this wider audience around us in receiving each of your perspectives and stories, because, you know, it truly is one of those things in our society that we don't talk about that much. We have the honor to journey with a loved one intimately through a grief experience. We might be there with them, but when it happens to us, it really is so unique, so personal. There's so much unexpected, and it's truly a journey. You know, it's not, as you and your mother acknowledge, kind of many times in different ways. It's like it doesn't stop, and it never stops. Right? It is a journey, and so this grief journey in particular that you 2 are so able to share in such a clear way, the confusion and the layers, and in that I again just felt this wide audience of all those of us who have lost someone so dear. Those of us who have lost family members, those of us who have lost the sibling, who have lost the child, and just, you know, the uniqueness and sharedness and connectedness to others in that.
Right.
Just I'm feeling so deeply how the voices that and the experiences and the thoughtfulness that each of you express is something that I just feel like this balm going out there on so many different hearts, you know?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That it makes me feel good because, in writing the book, that was one of our motivations. We wanted to tell Kirby's story. We wanted to be able to kind of provide this warning for people, or just like this moment of caution for people who are seeking.
Yeah.
But the other motivation was, grief is a universal experience. We all have it at some point. And like you said, we don't talk about it a lot in our culture. And so we thought that providing the two different perspectives would be useful. That it is an individual experience. It happens differently for you depending on what your relationship with the person was. And that, all the different ways that you experience it are valid. And then I think the other thing that I really wanted people to kind of understand was that, like you said, there are a lot of different little insights that we give into our experience. But overall, I think as a society, we look at grief as something that, somebody dies and you have to go through a period of mourning and then it's done and then you move on. But the reality is that a loss, it changes you. It's like any other experience you have that, you go off and have an amazing trip and it changes you. You go to university, it changes you. You have a relationship, whether it lasts or not, it changes you. And grief is an experience that changes you. And you don't come out of it and it's over. You move through it and you're a different person at the other, on the other side of it. So, yeah.
Oh, so agree. Yeah, Jean, and I know, again, I hope it's okay to kind of share some of these things, but I wondered, one of the things that struck me was what you shared kind of, I believe it was the morning after Kirby passed, and just kind of what your experience was around that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I remember it very clearly. My husband and I were living kind of in between Montreal and Ottawa. We had this really sweet little house, and it was like the window was east facing, so it was very bright in the room. And I just remember waking up and I learned about Kirby's death the day before. And so, I woke up and I was like, oh, Kirby, how could you be so stupid? This was like such a stupid thing that you did because, at that point we had just a few details about what had happened. We didn't really have the full picture of what she had gone through. So it felt like our understanding then was that it was kind of an accident. So it was that feeling of like, oh, what did you do?
Yeah, right. And I think, and the reason why I appreciate you sharing that, Jean, is because I think, again, there are these elements to the grief that hits us, and what comes forth from that can be so unexpected. And I was actually thinking, as I was, kind of thinking about you and your mother and what you shared, just how intimately woven grief is into our identity, and that it almost has us face our identity. So in a moment like that so many of us having a, like, Kirby, what did you do? Sort of like, and then there might be like a guilt about, wait, I'm blaming her, or I'm mad, or what have you. And it's so intimately tied into our identity of ourselves, right? Like, oh, I shouldn't be that person. Why am I mad? Or why would I be angry about this, or judgmental, or what have you? And I think those things can be so confusing. And I
Yeah.
feel like your gift to us in sharing that, Jean, is it's normal and natural. And it's, all these things that maybe we want to question or smush down because they don't make sense to us in terms of who we are as a person,
Right. Yeah.
kind of faced with in these moments, and the acceptance around that and understanding just how real the feelings are.
Yeah, totally.
And that they
No,
make
I was,
sense.
yeah, exactly. I was very fortunate, uh, you know, t- in going through this whole experience. Both of my parents are mental health professionals. So that's another reason why we thought, writing the book together was interesting, because my mom's perspective as, a clinical social worker, we thought would be really useful and valuable for people. So one of the things we talk about in the book was, in the first few weeks after Kirby had died, we kind of had like nightly check-ins with the whole family when we were all together at my parents' house, around the time of the funeral and that. And we made sure that we were all, like facing what we were going through, and that we were trying to understanding that people need to have some individual moments as well, but that, we were coming together to try to sort of face our feelings. And one of the things my dad did was just say, like, it's okay to feel angry, and you can express those feelings. It's okay to feel angry at Kirby. And yeah, my parents were really good at helping us accept and normalize all of those various feelings that would come up.
It's amazing and just so beautiful. And I think, between, your parents being mental health professionals, but also my sense is it's sort of like I can feel it in the fabric of your family that is your kind of way together, right? That you would come together and create this opportunity. Because I think also, were you guys at some point, as people are kind of cycling through, it's like sometimes somebody had to be on the phone in the meeting, or, just really making it happen, that inclusion and processing was there.
Yeah.
And especially around grief, that to have grief witnessed in some way is just, it's important. And then, like you said, also the ability to have some of the alone time, because there's a different manifestation of grief in those private moments too.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jean, this might be a good time to just ask you, it sounds like that was a real support for you all, kind of these nightly check-ins. And then I know it sounds like from the book, they did kind of continue even through the trial, just, check-ins, maybe not as frequently, but that there were kind of family meetings that were taking place, and that you guys also had a large kind of network of support. And I wondered if you might just speak to that, kind of what felt supportive to you during that time.
Yeah, definitely, all the family and friends reaching out was helpful. And, sometimes, I'm not a grief expert, but sometimes I feel like a little bit of a grief expert. And friends will ask me if they have a friend or someone who has lost someone, what can I say to them, or what can I do for them? And I always say, like, there's not really anything you can say that's right or wrong, but I think it's just showing up for people and being there for them. So, when I have friends who have lost someone, I'll often just send them a message and I'll say, I'm thinking about you. I don't expect you to reply. I know that, things are probably crazy for you, but I just want to let you know that I'm here if you need anything. And because I know that really helped me. I had people reach out, sharing their own experiences of having lost siblings, and those things were always very meaningful. Yeah, just reaching out, even if they didn't have, nothing anyone says can fix what happened, right? So it's just being there for people. That was definitely really helpful. And then, when I was writing the book, I did start seeing a therapist, which was important too. And I think that is important for people to feel comfortable seeking out that kind of help when they get to a point where they feel like they need it, and that's, again, very normal and very valid to need extra support sometimes. And then I guess the other thing I would say too, in terms of what helps, is that I guess maybe this is something more that I realized in retrospect, but it's just being gentle with yourself. Like grief causes a fog. I feel like it lasts about 2 years, which oddly is the same way I felt after giving birth to kids.
Yeah.
Where it's such a crazy experience, again, that changes you. And it took like 2 years for me to really, after both of my kids, to kind of gain myself back a little bit and figure out kind of who I was after that experience. So I think now I tell people, be gentle with yourself. You're going to be foggy and forgetful. You're going to drop the ball sometimes. You're going to have days where you feel like you can't do anything or accomplish anything, and not beating yourself up for that, I think, is really important.
Yes. And I love what you shared too. Thank you for sharing kind of the time, like a little bit of a time frame there, right? Around the 2 years. Because I remember, I think often when people are in grief, they might go to resources that are, books or what have you. And so occasionally I've come across information, kind of in the standard psychology world that's sort of like, yeah, one should be kind of moving out of these phases of grief after about a year, or even I've seen like 9 months. And every time I've seen something like that, it just makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah.
And so even to just hear kind of the 2-year time frame of like that fogginess and, and then certainly after the 2 years, it's like the manifestation is just different, right? Evolution of some sort, as we stated in the beginning. So I really appreciate also just your normalizing that.
Yeah. And I think, it could be different for people too. They could feel fine after 6 months or a year, right. Depending on the relationship you had with the person or other things that you have going on in your life. You might have something that really becomes engrossing and helps kind of take you out of that fogginess. I don't know. So yeah, I think the idea that it's different for everybody, but for me, 2 years was, that was my experience. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. And, I wonder, Jean, if you might say a little something just about kind of the uniqueness of this experience. It's like, your family is experiencing the grief that any family would experience at the loss of an intimate family member. But then in addition to that, you have things to deal with. Not that people don't have life things to deal with, but you guys have things to deal with beyond your normal life, which includes media, lawyers, realizing that there's going to be a trial, and then that whole journey. I mean, the ups and downs, I just cannot imagine kind of that, the additional ups and downs that kind of come with that. And as you and your mother so beautifully share in the book, just some of these circumstances as well that are unexpected when something's public, right? Like all of a sudden you're seen on the TV, there's an announcement that you haven't even heard yet, or you discover, just so odd, such an odd dimension to kind of bring into this process that's typically looks really different,
Yeah. No, it was totally very surreal in many respects. All loss is awful. Like there's no ranking how a loss feels or what it means to you. But yeah, our experience was so strange because like you said, it was like a big media story. So we were doing interviews. I talk about it in the book, how we did an interview with Larry King, which it's like, and that was so weird because, you know, it was exciting. Like it was exciting. It was kind of fun. And then I'm going like, oh, I don't want to feel excited about this because the reason that I'm here is so odd. But, you know, it was like, and then, yeah, doing all the interviews and
do you mind Jean sharing a little bit about that interview and kind of what your experience was there? Because that blew me away.
Oh, yeah, it was, I guess the thing I like the most that I write about it in the book was that, you know, the interview itself was disappointing. You know, Larry King leads the interview, right? He's Larry King. Like he's going to guide the conversation where he wants it to go. And it very much stayed on kind of our feelings, and whereas like we had tried to strategize before we went there, all of the things that we really wanted to get out and express to people. And of course, part of the difficulty is that the story itself is complex and a lot of it sounds a little crazy. At that time, especially in 2009, I think people weren't quite ready to fully understand these kinds of situations with these, you know, group dynamics and the coercive control and these you know, unethical or abusive leaders like this. So he wasn't asking the questions that we would have liked to answer. So we left definitely feeling defeated and, you know, frustrated. But I remember getting my hair and makeup done beforehand, and I talk about this in the book, and the makeup artist, she was just so kind. She spent so much time with us. She made us look amazing. And I always like hold on to that kindness. That was like the highlight of that experience, really. When the rest of it was frustrating, there was still this like moment of humanity that I had and connection with a stranger, you know?
Absolutely. And I think I also just have to point out the obvious kind of juxtaposition between your beautiful description of that moment and, you know, your outfit and her doing your makeup and kind of you also giving us a little description of yourself, you know,
right.
And us kind of being able to see like, oh yeah, okay. So there's this tenderness and care that happens, and that also that you're able to receive in that moment, you know? And then the Larry King experience, I mean, for me personally, from my perspective, it just felt so disappointing in terms of, you know, and again, I'm glad you pointed out the timeline, right? So society and even, you know, understanding victims and survivors,
right?
Different phase around that, but just honestly, to be direct, the lack of consideration around the family and a real respect for giving you all a voice in this story to also share the real story that actually kind of hadn't been shared.
Yeah, exactly.
So honestly, from my standpoint, that's a big miss on his part in a lot of ways.
Totally.
But ultimately, to me, it just feels, you know, what bothers me is this feeling of kind of disrespect of honoring, really paying attention to what this story is and what your experiences were.
Right. Yeah.
But that's my rant. I'm sure we might have a few more during the conversation, Jean.
For sure.
Well, and I think, you know, I appreciate your sharing that because it is one of many, you know, today we talk about like microaggressions, but it's like, it's one of many of these circumstances that you all have to face where it's like, you're your hearts are splayed open, and in this state, you're faced with public questions and a public spotlight. But at times, it's like you can't, it's just a constant kind of shutdown or being silenced indifferently. And that was so painful for me to feel those along the journey, and especially even in the trial.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was pretty shocking to me. Well, we can go there in a minute. I want to just be sure that, I think, Jean, you were going to continue in terms of maybe sharing something. So maybe I derailed us and we can go back to the trail I was just on, or if you're holding on to something, I want to just give you an opportunity to finish that thought.
No, I think I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think what's so fascinating to me about this case, let's say, is that there are so many moments where we get to see how society, the law, judges really don't at times fully support the truth and justice.
Yeah. I think it's, it's been interesting in the last few years. I feel like we've collectively kind of come a long way in our understanding, and had this, had my sister's death happened, a year ago, I think it would have played out very differently, because I think everybody has kind of evolved in our understanding of how these things happened. But at the time, like I said, back in 2009, people's understanding wasn't there. Our ideas, like, of course, it being a public thing and being in the media, we were reading articles. I was, even though I know you should not do this, but I would read comment sections, and people were like, oh, these like crazy cult people, were out in the desert. They shaved their heads, like they were just a bunch of weirdos. And, sometimes it would be like, well, I guess they got what they deserved, right? And obviously reading that was painful and infuriating, but it also just demonstrated the lack of understanding.
The ignorance.
And then when we got to, dealing with media interviews, and then especially in the trial, like the law was just not prepared, it just not equipped to really understand the full breadth of what had happened. And I think we kind of knew that going in. So our expectations, in a way, were a bit low, just because we knew, like, this story, it sounds crazy. It doesn't, it's hard to get your head around all of the details of what had happened and the state that people were in even before they entered the sweat lodge.
Right.
But like I said, I do think that is changing for a number of reasons. So at this point, I take heart. I have some more hope about how people might approach similar things now.
Yes, I agree. And, it's interesting from my perspective, Jean, when I look at this kind of the full picture, right, of what Ray was doing, his business model, that time, and all of that. And I think this was during our first meeting together. I know, I asked you this, so we'll get into this conversation around kind of cult versus kind of sorting through the cultiness of things.
Right.
But from my perspective, what's kind of interesting to me around this story and case is that, to me, upon first glance, it doesn't look like a cult. I mean, I get that there was the head shaving, right, that people maybe associate with whatever, Hare Krishnas or doing weird stuff or extremism. But from my perspective, this looks like a leader who has put together a bunch of information that is self-helpy, that it's sort of like on the surface must be pretty good. There are a lot of people attending. It gets a lot of traction. Now he's done The Secret. Now he's done Oprah, etc. Now he's got a really big following. He does these events. People come to the events. So there isn't, like, right there, it's like there isn't all this like isolation and kind of group dynamics that people typically associate with culty vibe.
Right.
It's sort of like he's a big figure with lots of people, and people just come to the event. They experience what they experience. They leave, they incorporate it into their lives. Maybe they come back, maybe they don't. Kind of not the general sense of entrapment that you typically find in the cult environment, right?
Right. Yeah.
So on the surface, to me, it what it actually looks like is there was an event. They were doing extreme things to push beyond the limits. And that's what everyone signed up for. And, and as the media portrayed it, and then an accident happened. So actually, on a surface level, I don't think it looks that culty. It kind of looks like what people do. And people do retreats and they do events. It's actually for me. And actually, I'll share this because I know I've shared this with you, Jean, but I think it might be an interesting point for the audience too, that I watched the documentary in Enlighten Us, The Rise and Fall of James Ray, close to when it first came out. I had a particular impression of it then. So it was very interesting for me to read your story, get all those details, and then to also rewatch the film.
Right.
And it's interesting to me, and I would say that this is a criticism that I have, that the film itself, and again, I mean, I can have some generosity around like maybe the lack of information at that time, as opposed to what we know now. But the fact that this documentary itself gives Ray such a platform to explain himself, to draw in kind of compassion from the audience, and frankly, that it doesn't go in to enough, in my opinion. I mean, we have, I think, 3 survivors, right, who were in the film.
I think so. Maybe 4. Yeah, I can't remember exactly.
Yeah,
a few of them.
4. But then, like, there is another layer of victim in this world of hurt. And that is also the families, right? And so, and let us, of course, mention the names of James Shore and Liz Newman,
right?
Who also have families that were absolutely wrecked and devastated by this thing. And to not have any representation around that. Also, there were many, many, many details missing around some of the things that I would label as the red flags of warning that lead to harm, or that are actually harm themselves.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was fascinating to me. I mean, I think to see at the end, Jean, and I'd love to get kind of your feelings about this. At the end of the Enlighten Us film, they show the trial and the judge speaking to Ray in terms of what his sentence is. And you get to see his reaction. So I have to say, I was absolutely disgusted by how the judge spoke. And here's why, because I don't know if you recall this or not. I would assume you probably do. there's a moment where the judge says to James Ray, he basically apologizes to him for sentencing, for having to sentence him to 2 years in prison, because he has obviously done incredible work and has transformed many lives. So there's actually a call out and kind of respect to James Ray about his incredible work that, as far as I'm concerned, I didn't really realize the judge did a deep dive into the amazing work of James Ray. I mean, does he know what he teaches? Did he go through those courses? You know, even that reference is absolutely infuriating to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real misperception to give the community. Right?
Yeah.
But then in that, there is a moment where he says he validates how difficult it is to understand how a group of people who are seemingly so intelligent and thoughtful and what have you, the attendees to this event, how it is, like, how can one sort of reconcile that none of these people helped, none of these people stopped it.
Right.
And again, when I heard that reference, that was, to me, let's cut through all the BS of it. That is victim blaming, literally putting the onus on the people that were there, that shouldn't have happened. That was part of his final statement.
Yeah. It was, he just didn't get it.
He didn't get it. And he also, you know, we were frustrated throughout the whole trial with the judge and, you know, Ray's lawyers, they're just doing their job, whatever. But yeah, the judge, he just didn't get it, and he didn't allow himself to get it. You know, one of the things with the trial that was so frustrating was that people had been harmed in previous sweat lodges of James Ray's in prior years, and the prosecutors weren't allowed to talk about those incidences. And we were going, but what he was being charged with, in order to prove that, they had to prove that he knew that he was putting people in danger. So part of proving that he knew people were in danger is saying, yeah, he should have known people were in danger because people had been harmed in previous years by doing this exact same event. And then here we are, 2009, he does the same event again, and not even the same event, he makes it even more extreme and more intense. And so obviously any person would realize, well, if I've done this before and people got hurt, maybe doing it again and doing it on an even more extreme level could also potentially hurt people. Ugh.
You know, so it was like, this is so clear and obvious, but the judge didn't allow testimony of the prior year's events. So, you know, that was one of the biggest frustrations. And then, like you're saying, in his closing arguments, making statements like that, in his closing statements, we're like, yeah, you just didn't get it. That's the whole point. Why didn't people leave? Why didn't people help others? That's the whole point. They were unable to,
right, because
of how mentally impaired they were, because they were all in there and they were all experiencing, you know, signs of heat stroke. And mental impairment is one of the markers of heat stroke. So that's one of the aspects. But then the other aspects are all of the events that had happened over the previous days of the retreat that caused them to just not really have and not be in control of their own thoughts and their own feelings.
Yes. So Jean, do you mind if I name some of those things?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I think, again, this is like good education in general for people as well. Okay, so interestingly enough, and this is this sort of culty reference that we made.
Right.
When people arrived, there was, well, Jean, you probably know, what was the kind of teaching or purpose behind this idea of the head shaving?
Yeah. So as far as I understand, it was kind of just this like symbol of shedding your past self, or shedding like the limiting beliefs that you might have about yourself. A big theme of the whole week was kind of death and rebirth. So I think it was, I wasn't there, and a lot of the information we've gotten, because looking back on some of the activities that they did, you're like, what? It's like kind of meaningless, and kind of, it's like word salady, or, it's kind of like, oh, what even is the point of all this? So it's hard to know exactly what the purpose of some of the things were, but I think it was that. I think it was that sense of like letting go of your past so that you're opening yourself to renewal.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's an interesting one because, we land in these environments. We've paid a lot of money. Mm-hmm. There's also the message coming from James Ray. Part of his big messaging is about we play full on, mm-hmm. right? That you play full on, you give it all you've got, and you commit to pushing yourself kind of beyond limits, right, in order to be free within in some way, or elevated.
Exactly. So yeah, I think that was the purpose as stated to the participants. Of course, looking back on it now, like the cult question, was it a cult or not a cult? We've often said it wasn't exactly a cult, but he was using cult-like tactics. Yeah. And so looking back on it, I think, the head shaving is a pretty manipulative tactic to kind of mess with people's sense of personal identity.
Yes.
And then challenge them into that very vulnerable space of doing something that they don't feel comfortable doing, but that they feel compelled to do because everyone else is doing it. Yes. So I think that was James Ray's purpose, but he wouldn't have stated it that way to everyone.
Well, right. And so that group pressure that happens in that environment then propels people to sort of acquiesce. But then I'm so glad you brought in the identity element to that, because it's true. It's sort of like a stripping of one's identity. And also in that group dynamic, as you make sacrifices that have to do with the group mind, then you are more, you're more propelled to continue to do that as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And there's also something about doing something or stating something publicly, which in a way that shaving the head is a public symbol, right? Everyone can see it.
Right.
It reminds me of how when we state something publicly to a group, we're more likely to do it, to embody that principle or idea.
Right. And it becomes the way of like very quickly bringing people together, right? We've all done this thing together, and it very quickly puts people in that group kind of mindset. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Yeah. So we have the head shaving happening kind of in rounds throughout the week, but kind of beginning right away. Then we also have him encouraging people to not sleep, to take full advantage of the time, to be journaling at night. And so often people, I think it was the rare person probably that was getting 8 hours. I think most people, like Kirby, was doing 2 or 3 hours,
Yeah.
So there's the sleep deprivation happening. Then there was this interesting exercise that was the last group exercise that everyone did together, where James Ray was kind of playing this God figure, and people were dying or living. It was sort of an exercise around honor, it sounded like.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything to say around that, but
this is another one of those, one of those exercises that I look back on and I'm like, it sounded, from everything I've ever heard about it, it sounds like the rules were very arbitrary. and that it didn't really make a lot of sense, or the purpose wasn't very obvious. Although I think people did, like my sister, for example, there's a recording of her after explaining her experience. And she personally had a profound experience, which is, I think, one of the interesting things that can happen at these kinds of events. That is important to note too. People can have profound experiences, even if the event or the leader are imperfect or are problematic in some ways. People can still have profound experiences. But yeah, I think, again, the underlying unstated purpose of that exercise was just establishing James Ray as sort of the ultimate voice of control and authority at the event and among the group.
Right. The hierarchical mindset is being established for everyone. Right. And he was even like wearing white and nobody else was. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So we've got the God exercise. And then after that, it sounds like there was a fasting and no water, no food, and then going into kind of the vision quest isolated journey where individuals were alone for, it sounded like almost 2 nights or.
Yeah, I think it was like 32 hours or something like that. Yeah. So again, I'm glad you put Vision Quest in air quotes, because again, that is another like valid indigenous tradition that James Ray just kind of appropriated and twisted around. But yeah, they went off. So, that's giving you, again, the sleep deprivation, because I can't imagine people were sleeping very well. Isolation, social isolation from other people can, we all know from the pandemic, right, that can really kind of mess with your head a bit, and then not having food and water. So yeah, it was another exercise that created a lot of circumstances of deprivation.
Yeah. It's also interesting with that isolation, what's sort of notable to me is, again, this sort of gray area and this weird line that one has to kind of evaluate of like the culty, not culty, consideration with, and this might be very subtle, but I also think about how when we are together, we allow like our questions to come forth as we're chatting with others, right? And especially in intimate environments like this. So it's an interesting thing that kind of this like hierarchical game gets established, and everybody has that either consciously or subconsciously in mind. And then no one can talk about anything that's gone on.
Right.
And that's the piece where it's like, I get that, this experience of going into the woods can be very powerful, very important. That's can be very sacred time.
Yeah.
But that happens, and that people are on their own also preparing, I assume, for the quote unquote sweat lodge ceremony the next morning, is kind of this, the isolation creates a lack of opportunity for people to actually start thinking critically and questioning anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then after no food and no water, which, as I understand, is exactly what you don't do. I mean, maybe people would fast for a little period of time so you don't have food in your system, but certainly when you're going into massive dehydration territory, I assume that the Native Americans don't recommend fasting from water, do they?
I would think not, yeah. No, definitely not a good idea to go into that kind of environment, like you said, kind of in dehydration territory. Definitely not a great idea. So, yeah.
I recall, actually, this is a story, Jean, This is where I hope you don't mind. I'm sure you and your family have had these experiences where it's almost like at times you just have to laugh about certain things or connections.
Yeah.
So this is a little one that's really like funny, not funny. But I think when I heard about this, it evoked for me this story that's another cult story where Wendy Duncan, who was in a kind of Christian-based cult that was led by a gentleman named Oli, this gentleman had prepared his group to do a ceremony of running over hot coals.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did massive preparation, right? And there's all this spiritual teaching around it. Like the ones who can do this will prevail. You know, it was a big weight put on kind of the enlightened beings can walk across these coals, right? Well, the guy had everybody fast for 24 hours beforehand. And the way that ceremony actually works is that when the foot touches a heat like that, our bodies take the moisture that we have, throw it into that area, you know, the brilliant way our bodies manage. And that's actually how people stop from being burned.
Right, right.
So needless to say, this guy, I mean, it's just one of those ridiculous kind of amazing cult leader moments, you know.
Right.
Everybody fast, they're all dehydrated. He goes across the coals. Long story short, he ends up in the hospital and then in a wheelchair for a long period of time because his feet are burned off, you know.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But what's interesting, you know, what relates to this particular non-sweat lodge is that, as you all point out, he also had, I mean, the sweat lodge was actually created with kind of tarps that were some sort of plastic material, right? And that's non-breathable. It's not actually the way that sweat lodges are created. And also size, I think, was very atypical. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So I will say, James, as far as like we kind of understand how it all happened, the venue, a place called Angel Valley, they were sort of responsible for actually constructing the sweat lodge. He, I think, gave some parameters in terms of the size and that kind of thing, but he didn't personally construct it for whatever, you know, purpose that serves in stating that. But yeah, he, you know, I talk about this in the book as well. I did like some Googling, like what are traditional sweat lodges like? So yeah, the materials of the sweat lodge were problematic. The size of the sweat lodge, the number of people that it contained. There were like 50 to 60 people inside this sweat lodge, whereas, you know, most Native American people who run sweat lodges will say they won't have more than like 6 to 10 people usually, for safety reasons and, you know, for a variety of reasons. But one being that it's harder to keep track of everybody if you have so many people. It's just irresponsible. And then also the length of time that they did it for. And, you know, it ended up in total being like almost 2 hours.
Wow.
And then how hot it was, you know, they heat up the stones. They take these big stones, they call them the grandfather stones, and they heat them up outside in a fire, and then they bring them in and put them like in a pit and pour water over them, and that's how it heats the lodge. So yeah, the number of stones, you know, he was making it hotter than it had even been in previous years. So yeah, there are a lot of things about how it was run that were dangerous, you know, and it proved to be dangerous. Like, I don't think it was his intention for people to die, but he ran it in such a dangerous way that it became almost inevitable that people would be severely harmed. Yeah. So, yeah.
Right. I mean, truly negligent.
Yes, yeah.
And then we know also that within the sweat lodge that there was a moment where somebody actually stated that Kirby could breathe.
Right.
And he gave the directive to wait.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And said, and again, when people were also leaving, he was doing a whole encouragement thing around the people that were leaving, like, you've got this, you can do this, you're more than this, kind of connecting. I mean, surely this was the case probably for everybody, but it's sort of like the identity gets merged with, this is who I am, that I can overcome this.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, I've said he was not physically blocking the door. He wasn't physically preventing anyone from leaving, but he was emotionally, mentally kind of discouraging people from leaving. And I think that, when you get down to what happened in the sweat lodge, it was really that combination of people were physically weak after, the fasting and the sleep deprivation and the lack of water. They were physically weak. They were mentally weak for some of the same reasons, all of the deprivation. And then they had been conditioned to see him as the authority. So when he would say, no, you can't leave, that had enough of an impact that it overrode any physical discomfort that they were having. So their bodies were telling them, this is dangerous, I need to leave. And he was telling them, you're more than your body. And that's ultimately what had more sway over their decision making.
You're more than your body, and you're going to feel like you're going to die.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, to plant that before they even experience it, it's, preparation for overriding one's own intuition, as you said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, Jean. Well, then, so, I mean, this is so disturbing, amazing. And so I want to just acknowledge also with the sweat lodge is over, people are out, people are very not well. I mean, there's a wide variety of what's going on, right? People who are unconscious, who are puking, who are passed out. I mean, there's a lot happening. And I do want to just acknowledge this. I mean, I just think of what the heart of this man must be, right? With being sure, and that he actually comes out of the tent, then actually saves somebody's life by dragging them out.
Yeah.
And then was he back in kind of with Kirby and Liz?
Yeah, that's our understanding, because he and Kirby were found kind of together. So like you mentioned, some people had been saying, people are unwell. It seemed like they were talking about Kirby when people were noting, like, we're not sure if she's breathing. And so from what we understand, it does seem like James Shore went back in to either be with her or perhaps to try to bring her out, and then himself was overcome. So, his story is especially heartbreaking. And, for all three of our families, again, people grieve in different ways, and people have capacity for different things for a variety of reasons. The other families haven't been as outspoken as we have, but for sure, trying to have their deaths be meaningful is also part of our motivation, why we have continued to tell this story, understanding that the other families are free to approach it however they need to or want to. Yeah,
right. Yeah. Not every, and honestly, in my mind, it's like, in some ways, you all are the voice for Kirby, but if other families feel like it's not right for them, they don't want to be in the spotlight, they've got other things going on, they want to move forward, all the multitude of reasons that people would not kind of continue to be in this work, let's say. That in some ways that you all get to be carrying that forward as well, some of their legacies. So beautiful, reminds me of how we can prop each other up a little bit,
Yeah.
So then I found this fascinating, and this was most of the things that we've talked about weren't even necessarily in the Enlighten Us documentary, more, but not all of that. And then I noted that this fact was mentioned, but it's so brief that it almost doesn't land. And I kind of went, whoa. So I'm curious. I have a question for you, Jean, if this kind of like came up in the trial or what around this. So there's a moment now of 15 minutes where Kirby, Liz, and James are still in the tent. And the beauty of hearing, my heart just really went out to the daughter who was helping with the ceremony of the couple who were running Angel Valley, and how she talked about, that realizing that 3 people were still in there, that she and her mother actually, and this shows you the coercive control dynamic, that these 2 people who, as you said, are actually the ones that are in charge. They're heating the rocks. They helped with the tent, etc. So these guys are kind of managing, let's say, the physicality around the sweat lodge, and that they even feel that they have to ask James Ray,
right,
can we lift the side of the tent to let these people out? But what's even more shocking is that he shames them, saying that it would be sacrilegious.
Right.
As though whatever sacredness around, holiness around that tent is more important than 3 people who are in that tent who are really unwell.
Yeah.
I mean, that, so may I ask you, Jean, did that come out in the trial? Was that something that got addressed, or?
It did come out in the trial. And actually, that the woman, the young woman that you're talking about, I believe her name is Sarah Mercer. She testified, and that was some of the hardest testimony, I think, during the whole trial, because here she was, this pretty young girl, and I haven't spoken to her since, or I don't know anything about her life now, but I imagine that it was a very traumatic experience for her. And again, just shows you like the ripple effects that the whole event had. It was more than just the people who died. It was, the other participants, the other people who were there, the people who owned the space, and then, the families. It was, her testimony was incredibly powerful, and it was really heartbreaking to hear how it had impacted her. Yeah. And like you're saying, that idea that these were people who, they were kind of around throughout the week, kind of helping with things, but they weren't participants. And yet that sense of authority was established for them as well. It was pretty remarkable.
We so hope that you enjoyed this episode. These podcasts were edited by Nathan Lemke. If you'd like to work with him, please reach out to me and I will put him in touch with you. And please stay tuned for part of Leaving the Cult, the season 2 song written by Jaya Suri, and for all things related to Jaya, her music, ways that you can support her, check out the show notes.